his mom still wants answers. The grief that was caused by this police violence that police have never owned up to, have never apologized for.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
We're going to get right into our interview with Lee Hedgepeth. Lee Hedgepeth is a longtime Alabama journalist, and he came from CBS 42 before parting ways with them and beginning an independent journalism outfit, Tread by Lee. You can follow him on Twitter at, I think it's at Lee Hedgepeth, and then his, you can follow at Tread by Lee on Twitter as well. So Lee, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us here on the Valley Labor Report.
Of course, glad to be here.
So the first thing, I guess, is you were a journalist at CBS 42. How long did you work? How long were you working there? It was a while, wasn't it?
Yes, I was at CBS 42 for about 2 years. Before that, my training was in basically newspapers across the state. So I worked down in Mobile at a newspaper called Lagniappe, an alternative weekly down there. And then I worked at the Anniston Star, which is a newspaper in East Alabama. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, and so you had a, the split was not amicable, and I'm not clear about whether it was a resignation or you were actually fired. But can you talk to us about what happened there?
Sure. So, kind of my role at CBS 42, I was a digital investigative reporter. So the typical kinds of stories that TV stations in Alabama produce are stories that are focused on, what can I get in a package, a minute and 30 package? What is very visual? What types of interviews can I turn around in a day? And that's not the type of journalism that I had done at newspapers, right? I had done more long form investigative journalism. And so that's what I was doing at CBS 42. So it was already a kind of journalism that wasn't really particularly fit with the medium that I was using, right? A TV station isn't exactly the venue for publishing that type of long form journalism. But I was trying to do those types of stories. So one story that we had been working on there at CBS was the story of Anthony Mitchell. So this is an individual who was having some drug issues, having some mental instability issues. His family ended up calling local police in Walker County for a welfare check. And when the police came, they alleged that Anthony shot at them. They ended up arresting him for attempted murder after, going on a welfare check. His family said, that kind of shows the danger of calling police in situations like this in places like Alabama and really anywhere. But after he's in police custody for about 2 weeks, he ends up dying in police custody. So his family later files a lawsuit saying that he froze to death. And so I was able to break the story of his death in police custody. It was a story that was really important to me. We had another reporter there at CBS that is from Walker County, so it was important to her as well. A couple of weeks after this happened,
well, really quickly before we get into that, his death in police custody was, really kind of uniquely astonished. Just unique in its grossness, right?
Sure, yeah. So one of the things that's alleged in the federal lawsuit that his family's filed is that he froze to death, right? So the doctor's notes from the ER say that his body temperature was something like 72 degrees when he arrived at the hospital. This is severe hypothermia. His family says he was kept in a frigid environment over a long period of time, something that Walker County officials have denied. But obviously, you can't deny that he died, and he died of hypothermia. Particularly gross situation, and one that's really important. I felt was really important to make sure people understood not just the police side of this and kind of the mainstream media's take on it, which was always, if you shoot at police, you're going to get shot. Right. And that type of narrative is one that I think is very easy for journalists who may not want to make that second phone call to somebody besides the police. Right. And I think it's something that we have to work on as journalists in Alabama, is like figuring out, we can't just allow police statements to just be the entire story, which is a lot of the case in some of these more mainstream reports.
Yeah, I mean, I saw something the other day that just, and it's something that I think a lot of people have known, but about the fentanyl overdoses, quote unquote, by police officers. They're all across the country saying that, oh, I just touched fentanyl and I overdosed, and there's absolutely no data or anything to suggest that that's even possible. And in fact, the symptoms that cops say that they have when they get quote unquote overdosed by fentanyl is more consistent with a panic attack than with than with fentanyl overdose. And that's something that you just see all the time. Like reporters just say that, oh yeah, well the police said this, and so that's the case. Right. And so it's really good to see folks like you at least questioning it, like is not even necessarily just assuming that the cops are lying to you, but trust but verify, right? That was the Ronald Reagan thing. Yeah. Trust but verify. And so you did some work trying to verify some of the facts around this story, and you can pick up from there.
Yeah, so, the issue with CBS came along when the Attorney General was in town. So Attorney General Steve Marshall has been a very vocal opponent of any measures that would, lessen the incarceral reality of the state of Alabama. Mm-hmm. And so he had been going around kind of talking to news outlets about how bad the quote unquote inmate release was. So a few inmates were released a couple of months ago, based on a law that was passed a couple of years ago by the Alabama legislature, right? They should have known that this was happening. And the Alabama Department of Corrections had failed to notify some of the victims. And so that became an issue in the release. But basically, the Attorney General was going around on this kind of media frenzy, talking about how horrible it was that we were releasing prisoners that in large part had spent, much of their entire sentence already incarcerated and served those sentences. But the Attorney General said to CBS's management, I will answer your questions about Walker County, which in reality that meant I will say it's being investigated and I can't say anything. If and only if you interview me and ask about how bad this inmate release was, right? Those types of conditions are not types of conditions that journalists should be accepting. Right. If you want to, you should answer, and it is your job to answer questions about an Alabamian that died in police custody. Right. You're the top law enforcement in the state of Alabama, and it's your job to answer those questions. So CBS did not tell me about this proposal. Our Montgomery reporter said that she wouldn't do the interview because of the condition that the Attorney General had set, but they chose to do it anyway. They had a host at CBS do the interview with the Attorney General. The Attorney General didn't really say anything of substance at first about the Walker County case. We showed him a video that I had obtained there at CBS 42 related to Mr. Mitchell being taken out by Walker County Sheriff's Office and placed into a police vehicle. And the police vehicle was then taken to the medical emergency. The police had originally told us that Mr. Mitchell was alert and conscious when he left the jail. And in the video, he's clearly not alert and conscious, right? His feet are dangling as these officers carry him and kind of stuff him into a police vehicle. And so I was insistent that we show the Attorney General this video on camera. Well, on camera,
just really what, and this is kind of the crux of the thing that you're about to get to, but just another note for people, and maybe this is a different story and I'm mistaking it, but isn't it correct that this video was not released through official channels and by a FOIA or anything? This was released by an employee of the jail who felt like this is something that the family deserved to see, and then that employee was disciplined. Is that correct?
That's right. So this was a jail employee, actually a jail employee who had made Employee of the Month a couple of months earlier. So you can still go to Walker County's page and see like her Employee of the Month photo. But yeah, she saw the surveillance video from inside the jail of the way that Mr. Mitchell was being treated, and kind of took that, recorded on her phone some of that surveillance video, which eventually we obtained at CBS 42 and aired that video. But yeah, we showed that video to the Attorney General. In the initial interview with Ani Lindenberg there on CBS, he actually didn't see the video. So after the interview had concluded, he said, I actually didn't see that. So he's still mic'd, still on camera. I actually didn't see that video. Can you roll it again for me? And so they roll the video again. And the Attorney General of Alabama, top law enforcement in the state, says, it appears to me he might be posturing. So this is a man who clearly is unconscious, is being placed into a vehicle to be brought to the hospital. And the Attorney General is speculating that he is posturing, right? So when I saw that video, I felt it needed to be released, right? He hadn't said anything about what happened to Anthony Mitchell of substance. He said it would be investigated, that type of thing. He said you can't trust a video that shows a single moment in time. But then once the interview had concluded, he made this comment about him posturing. And I felt like that was something that the folks of Alabama should see. So I tweeted that section of the interview with him, making those comments about Mr. Mitchell and news management, did not agree with that decision. And so they chose to reprimand me, a written reprimand, and I chose to just go ahead and part ways and move into my work at TRED, which is what I'm working on now.
Yeah, and I think that was the right decision, and I think that it's really a shame that the people who are they would say leaders in the journalism industry in Alabama. I think representatives of Capitol might be a more accurate summary of their position, but it is really a shame that they did not feel like Alabamians deserve to see the Attorney General's initial reaction to this, which was, again, he knew the facts of the case in that he knew that this guy was found later dead of hypothermia. Sure. And the idea that you could see a couple hours before he's not alert and your first thought is that he's posturing is just wild. And yeah, folks deserve to know that.
Right, because I think it's very revealing of a particular mindset of Steve Marshall, our Attorney General. And yeah, I agree with Jacob. I applaud you for trying to do the right thing. As someone who has been retaliated against on the job for telling the truth, you have my sympathies, and I certainly know what it feels like. And more power to you. I really appreciate you taking your work seriously, because there's a responsibility that journalists have to tell the truth to the public. But unfortunately, business and politics gets in the way of that sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Lee, talk to us about your new project, Tread by Lee. Is that a Substack, or is that like a website that you have, or?
Yeah, so a website that's kind of based on Substack, and we have kind of branched out into, doing as much coverage as we can. I'm only one person, but I'm trying to, tell the stories that I was already telling at CBS, but kind of tell them in a more in-depth, long-form way, using original photography, original reporting to kind of bolster that reporting. But I'm doing kind of the same stories that I was doing before at CBS. So stories that are featuring folks that typically aren't heard from in the Alabama media, right? So one of the things, for example, that I've been trying to do more work on, a couple of topics, one of them being the death penalty. Death penalty is really important to me. Alabama is one of the few states that are conducting most of the executions in the country. All right. We've seen, most states aren't executing folks anymore, right? Most countries don't execute folks anymore. And so that's an issue that's important to me. Police shootings have been something that I've been covering recently for TRED that have been important to me, and that was also a theme while I was at CBS. So, talking to families who've been impacted by police violence. So another Walker County story just wrote a couple of days ago related to the Gardendale Police Department, which is a police department right outside of Birmingham, went outside their jurisdiction by like 30 miles to serve a narcotics warrant in Cordova, Alabama, over in Walker County. So they go around 6 a.m. to serve this search warrant for narcotics. They bust the door down. And a man and his family are inside. They say they told me in interviews afterward, the police didn't announce themselves. So when they come in, the individual in the house has armed himself with a legal weapon. He shoots at police, they shoot back, and they kill this man in front of his 9-year-old child, his wife, and his mother. Right? So this is a story where every other news outlet in the state had run headlines like, man who shot at police killed, something like that, right?
Right.
This was a man who was killed in front of his 9-year-old child.
Right.
And the headlines in every news outlet, folks can Google this at home, just Cordova shooting by police. All of these headlines are basically indicting this man of a crime that he can never be tried for, right? So one of the things I think is important to me as a journalist, and that I think other journalists should really try to do, is to make sure if police's statement is the only statement you have for a story, you don't have a story. You need to pick up the phone. You need to go knock on a door. You need to talk to someone who was there, right? So, when these types of stories get published in Alabama, you get a lot of pushback from some people in the public who say, well, he shot at police. Why are you, some folks have called me, well, why are you a biased reporter in this? Bias is telling the police's side without telling the other side, right? So I think that I'll just encourage folks who are listening, when you read a news story, think about who is being interviewed in the story, who is being heard in the story, and why. If you're not hearing from somebody you think you should, there may be a reason for that, right? Tweet that author and ask them, why aren't you interviewing the family of the person who's been shot, right? Why aren't you interviewing anyone but police? Why is this story completely based on police statements? So I think, journalists have the primary responsibility here, right? We're the ones writing the stories. But I think, individual consumers of news also have a lot of power in terms of, where you click is where your money's going, right? Your attention is really valuable to people. You get what you pay for. If you're not paying for journalism, that means somebody else is paying for it. What's their agenda? So I think, those are a lot of questions that news consumers in the state need to ask themselves to make sure that you're not contributing to some of these issues when it comes to media coverage of very important issues like police violence, like the death penalty, things like that.
Is there any indication at all that these officers in Cordova are going to face disciplinary action or termination?
Not right now. So in this case, as in almost all cases of what police call officer-involved shootings, which is and you'll see that in headlines, and which is just translated to "we shot someone and we don't want to admit it."
Right.
So in all of those cases, basically what happens is the Alabama law enforcement agency takes over the investigation, and that becomes a black box, right? So I covered extensively a case here in Birmingham where the Birmingham Police Department shot and killed a young man named Keelan Cannell here in Birmingham. And that case, took forever for the Alabama law enforcement agency to come to their conclusion that it was a justified shooting. I've never seen a case, where Alabama law enforcement agency did not rule the shooting justified. There may be one out there somewhere. I'm not aware of it. So these cases take years to investigate, months and months, if not years to investigate. And then when ALEA comes out with their conclusion, it's almost always that the shooting was justified. So, like in the Birmingham case with Keelan Cannell, his mom still wants answers. This happened years ago, and I went to his funeral here in Birmingham and watched the grief that was caused by this police violence that police have never owned up to, have never apologized for, have never given answers about. So, these are the type of stories that are important to me, to make sure, not just in the short term, like this family in Cordova, their story has been told, if only by, my little news outlet. But it's also important to think like down the line, like you said, what are the consequences for these officers? What is ALEA's conclusion going to be? And so like following that story is what's important to me, and something that news outlets, aren't very good at, right? You don't necessarily always see the follow-up that you think you should.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact of the matter is that cops just never get, there's never any accountability for their actions. And even in, there was one that I'm thinking of in Texas where it was also a mistaken entry, and this person and this officer killed somebody, and Ted Cruz goes out there, saying that this officer shouldn't lose her job. She should be able to maintain her job. And in my estimation, even if we grant that there was no malice there, or your mistake your mistake killed somebody, you should never have a license to kill again because you can't handle it. You've proven that you can't handle it, and your mistake, somebody is dead because of your mistake, even if there was no malice there. And so just do something else, because, do some other type of work, right? It's not your right to be a cop. It seems to me that the least that ought to happen is if your mistake results in the death of somebody, you can never be a cop again. But of course, somehow it seems like, the people with power don't agree with that. So,
yeah, well, there seems to be, in Alabama, at least, I think of this one case out of Talladega from a couple of years ago where we get a press release from the Alabama Law Enforcement Agency, kind of a typical thing where it's like there was a single vehicle crash in Talladega. A white Charger struck an individual, ran them over, and the individual died. So very typical press release. It was a really slow night, so I decided just to call Aaliyah to get some more information, maybe get the family of the person who died to interview the family, see a little bit more about who they were. I very quickly find out that the white Dodge Charger that had struck this person was a Talladega police cruiser.
Wow.
Aaliyah did not mention this in their press release. Press release that was, AL.com ran it, WBRC ran it. All the large media outlets in the state had run the story about, Brandon McFry, age whatever, dies after being struck by a car. The car was a police officer. It was in a police chase. I interviewed the entire family about, one of the individuals in the car, his fiance, literally tells me, I seen him get hit. That was her words. Why are we not hearing these stories? Right. So, obviously Aaliyah is at fault for not telling the public what happened in that case. The Talladega Police Department's at fault for not telling people what happened in the case. But the media, their job is to find out what actually happened, right? So I'm glad I picked up the phone and made that call, but what if I hadn't? Right. This family they're not going out to media outlets to try to get their story told necessarily, right? Like it's our job to tell those stories. And I think that, we're in a situation in Alabama where we don't have enough good journalists to tell the stories that need to be told. And we're in a situation of triage where we've got, we live in a semi-authoritarian state. The government, its policies are leading to harm for a lot of citizens. And it's our job as journalists to go out and to document that harm and tell folks, look, here's what is happening and here's why.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's a question that I'm pretty sure I know the answer to. Was that officer ever disciplined or terminated?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of.
Not that you're aware of. Yeah, that's what I figured. Wild stuff.
Lee, I just want to say I really appreciate your comments, and I think it really resonates, and that's part of why we're doing what we're doing to amplify the voice of Southern labor, in particular the Alabama labor movement, because when it comes to working class people, the media is just not there for us. The media really doesn't work for us. It's not built for us. We're not represented in the media. And the media is not really interested in telling our stories in an authentic way. And so you see that time after time after time when there are struggles between workers and employers, and it's the employer side that gets told, right? It's the press releases from Warrior Met that gets read. It's not the struggles of the striking miner that's told. And so, I think what you're doing is really, really important. And, I really appreciate what you're doing. And I think we do need much more quality journalism in the state. And there are some people doing good work. I don't want to suggest otherwise. But it's not enough. It's not enough, particularly given the conditions we live in. We as a state rank at or near the bottom of every aspect of quality of life, every aspect of our life and our society and our civilization. And so, there's just a need to tell the truth and a need to educate and agitate folks and inform folks. And so, I really appreciate your commentary.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Lee Hedgepeth, you can follow him on Twitter at Lee_Hedgepeth. You can follow his newsletter, Tread by Lee, on Twitter at Tread by Lee or treadbylee.com. Lee. treadbylee.com. Really appreciate it, man. Look forward to talking to you again.
Keep up the good work.
Thank y'all so much for having me.
Absolutely.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.